Lad os sammen tegne en fremtid med rollemodeller for alle.
Denne serie handler om, hvordan vi kan bane vejen for at få flere kvinder på toppen af dansk erhvervsliv.
Maria Anker Andersen fra Female Leadership Academy og Josefine Folkvarts fra Kvindekompagniet taler med en række erhvervsledere om diversitet og spørger, hvad de gør, for at piger i dag kan se sig selv som topchefer i fremtiden.
I'm Josefine Folkvarts, and today I am visiting the pharmaceutical company Lundbeck near Copenhagen. I'm delighted to have Deborah Dunsire, who is the CEO of the company, with me today. Deborah is a medical doctor turned board executive and a business leader. I know you're passionate about equal rights, and that is obviously why we are here today, to find role models for Anna Sophia. So how do you drive diversity through your leadership here in Lundbeck?
Well, I think first and foremost, we hire, and actually more women than men, people who've applied for jobs here, who have the right backgrounds, a lot of people in STEM and finance. As we go up through the organization, we try to make sure that every time we're hiring for new positions or promoting people, we look at the diversity of the slate that we are hiring from. We also do something really important, and that's unconscious bias training. Because I think one of the blocks for women advancing is sometimes they're advancing into more of a male-dominated, higher leadership level in most companies still today. And sometimes people don't even realize that they're looking for people who reflect their younger self. And so we need to train those more mature leaders how to recognize unconscious bias, because they don't mean to do it. So we work with development programs, making sure we get equal opportunity for both genders. We also work with training older managers to understand the impact of unconscious bias. And then we take a disciplined look at every hiring position and make sure we've got equal opportunity, and we're considering a diverse slate of candidates. It's important for women coming back to the workplace after having children that they can be welcomed back and brought back in and developed. And so we look specifically at how mothers come back into the workplace after maternity leave. One of the greatest things that's happening in Denmark is the need for people to take paternity leave, because the more that we can look more equally at genders and sharing those important opportunities, also burdens of childcare, the more we can help both genders advance.
So that is the recent legislation you're mentioning that now means that also the fathers will have some paternity leave that they have to take, and that immediately levels the playing field for men and women to an extent anyways.
Starts to, yes.
It starts to. So that will have an impact. And you're also mentioning unconscious bias. What kind of biases have you discovered through this training?
Well, the reason we do the training is because there's so much research on unconscious bias. For instance, in our own industry, if you look at venture capital, people pitching entrepreneurial ideas, if the same script pitching an idea is read by a man or a woman, the male reader will get funding at least twice to 3 times as often as when the very same script is read by a female reader. And that's the product of unconscious bias, because there's no objective difference. So we know that we need to uncover that. And so people need to understand when they're seeking things that look like themselves, rather than seeking the best candidate or the best qualified person for the job. So we do the training because the research shows that there is unconscious bias.
Have there been some eye-openers on the way through this unconscious bias training? How do people react to it here?
Well, I think people are always surprised, and they feel that they don't carry bias. people, and particularly in a society that is very equality oriented and has been for many years, I think people feel that there isn't such a thing. But actually, when they go through it and they hear different language or they see different examples, they do become more aware. One of the things that's interesting is looking at even how we post job descriptions to hire people. There's different language that will be much more attractive to male candidates than female. So there are so many things we have to think about when in making inclusivity real, from the very point at which we set out a job description to hire somebody and all the way through life within a company. There are places that we can do work to make our environment the most inclusive. And that's important for business. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's very important for the business to thrive. Diversity, it's been shown, and it's not just gender diversity. It's diversity across ethnicities, nationalities, backgrounds, experiences. Diverse teams are better able to innovate, and we're in the innovation business. When we're going to treat brain disease and crack the code on diseases that have been so recalcitrant to treatment, we've got to innovate. And so we need diversity. And for diversity to really function and thrive, we have to create an inclusive workplace where everybody can bring their whole self to work, because that's where you get their best thinking, the best challenge to new ways of doing things, the best solutions emerging to problems that don't have a ready-made solution. So my belief in diversity comes from those two aspects, the human aspect of the right thing to do, but the business aspect of to innovate, you need diversity.
So it's a bit of a win-win when you drive diversity, because of course it's a right thing to do, as you mentioned, but it also means that it makes business sense.
100%.
You get more innovation. But how has your experience been here in Denmark driving diversity? Because as you say, people often think we have it because it's a very equal society, but at the same time, do we?
Well, I think that there's still work to be done. There's work to be done around the world. And I think what's surprising in Denmark, and I've heard about it since I came here, is that there are still fewer senior leaders and leaders of companies in Denmark that are women. There are fewer women entrepreneurs. So Denmark is still manifesting some of the same issues that are manifest around the world. So there's more work to do in Denmark. And so yes, that's on the gender diversity. The other aspect of diversity within Denmark is to be sure that we're broadening our thinking to the globe and making sure that we've got access to global talent with different experiences. Because it's not only that we should create gender equality, but we need that injection of other experience, other background, other thought to be able to really profit from a true diversity across all aspects.
And that's from the international perspective, but if we think about from a female leadership perspective, you're obviously a talent brought in from abroad, but what about growing female talent from within the company and also making sure that you get more diversity on top level?
Well, I think those are the training, mentoring, and advancing programs. One of the things that I think is important for women, and you've certainly highlighted it for in your video, that women need role models. Sometimes for any minority, and at senior leadership levels, we still do have a minority in women. At the overall level of our company, we're actually more women than men when we take the whole workforce together. But at the senior levels, we still have a gap. And for some women, sometimes it's hard to say, what is the path when, yes, I do want to be a mother, I want to be a a successful executive, how do I do that? And having other senior leaders ahead of them gives them the possibility to say, oh, it is possible. So I think role modeling, mentoring is critically important. Making sure people understand what is the path for them to develop along, what is required. And this is a conversation certainly I've had, particularly in my experience in the US, of saying to women, if you want to aspire to these upper level jobs in your field, here are the types of experiences you need to get. And then encouraging women to reach out to apply for jobs that will give them those experiences. And making sure that when we're interviewing, we always have a diverse slate. So I'm not satisfied unless there are women and men on each job posting that we hire for, whether it's from our internal talent or from the outside. Because unless you require that managers look at both genders, you'll never break that cycle.
And here at Lundbeck, how do you work with diversity more specifically? Do you have a team managing that, or is it HR? And what seems to be working best of the initiatives?
You know, we have a diversity forum. We've got a lot of people who are passionate about it. So it's anchored with some of our folks in HR and then in policy and advocacy and communication that work very closely together. And then we have people who are passionate about diversity, not only gender, who want to work with it around our locations as a diversity forum, who make the suggestions of how can we become a more inclusive workplace, and who work on celebrating difference. It's probably most advanced actually in the US, where it's celebrating Black History Month and calling on our Black colleagues to tell their stories, to be the role models, Black women and men. Because if women are a minority, Black women are an even smaller minority. So enabling the celebration of those differences is critically important.
It's interesting you mentioned the US, because you've been in the US, you are educated in South Africa, you've also worked as a medical doctor in South Africa during the apartheid. So you have some really interesting experiences behind you. Where do you take some of these experiences and apply them to the Danish workspace, and what can Denmark learn from, for example, the US and South Africa?
I think that the interesting thing about what's particularly been happening in the US is the need for diversity to go beyond numbers and accounting to this concept of inclusion. So diversity is having different people. Inclusion means people having a voice and an ability to influence. And that's a step that's still important. Then there's equity. How do people's voices get heard equally? And then the step of belonging. How do people feel that they own and have influence because their full difference is recognized and valued? There being a value of difference. And one of the most important parts of that journey is being able to talk about it and recognize the valid differences in background and experience, and celebrate those and value them, because they are what drive the ability to solve new problems in a different way.
So it's validating that everyone is bringing something important to the table. Is that what we'd call inclusion as well? When there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, because one thing is hiring diverse, but you also want to make sure people want to stay.
Yes, and that they feel that their difference brings something important, that it's valuable. So you don't have women who are trying to emulate the behaviors of men. We value the intrinsic behaviors of men. We value the intrinsic behaviors of women, and both are important and necessary. So we don't want people who are different than the norm, white men, right? That the norm is still in business around the world, white men. We don't want everybody to have to behave and look like that. We certainly can profit from that, but we want to value those differences. And I think, drawing on the experience in South Africa, as a child you grow up and you don't question that there are people who are a different color that are treated as lesser. But then as you grow up, you say, this is not right. And it's an appalling loss of potential. And it's driven by not valuing difference, not valuing somebody who is other than me, because I believe that only things that are like me are valuable. And taken to the extreme of apartheid, it degrades people, but it hugely damages the potential of a nation. And so that's the extreme version, but little versions of that can happen daily when we think there's a norm, there's a way, there's one way to be successful, and it looks like the way successful white men have been successful for generations. And let's not take anything away. They've been enormously successful. So we're not trying to lose that or say that it's bad, but we're trying to say there are other different ways to be successful. And not only that, there are ways to generate more, the sum of the part, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts when we profit from those differences.
So we can learn a lot from the South African example, and luckily South Africa has advanced a lot from the apartheid years, and it's a very different place now. But how are you experiencing being a female leader on the top? Are people appreciating the diversity you bring to the leadership team?
I think that people have been very accepting that there is a woman leader, so that there hasn't been resistance to it. But there is still a difference in the way people will evaluate. If a woman is tough, it's viewed very differently than a man being tough. And that still exists today, and I think it exists worldwide.
So it's more challenging for you, basically, because people will react differently to you.
Yes.
And do you have any examples of how you managed that situation, or where you have had to deal with it in a special way?
I think the important thing is that we're always learning. In any interactions, one learns how are things received, and how does one have to adapt. So I'm certainly a work in progress, and I'm learning how do things strike people in this different culture than in cultures that I've worked in the past. And I think there's a need in Denmark to address things in perhaps a different way than one would in the US or in South Africa or in Switzerland, where I've worked before. So understanding the culture that one is coming into, it's always a deep thing.
And as you say, that a lot of internationals, they're surprised because they think they'll understand the Danes immediately because we communicate very well in English, and then actually there are some big cultural differences, and they surprise people when they come here. But what do you think now, having been here for a few years, what do you think other Danish top leaders can learn from the companies that you've been in, the countries that you've been in, and from you as a top leader working with diversity, particularly also with gender diversity?
Well, I think there's a lot of the top leaders that I've met in Denmark do certainly have a strong focus on diversity. So I think it is a topic that is very much in the ether, if you like, of Denmark. But there's still a questioning of why aren't we making more progress? And I think it comes down to what gets measured gets done, and really looking at measuring how are we doing at each level of an organization. And if there's an imbalance, why is that existing, and what specific action are we going to take to try and change that? Because it doesn't change by itself, even with all the goodwill and the good intentions, until you diagnose specifically the issue and create specific action plans to address it, it won't change.
You need to actively drive it and make
Yes.
it a priority in your organization.
Yes, and you have to measure it, and you have to measure it across each function in the organization. You have to talk about it, because it has to be beyond HR. Diversity is not an HR initiative, it's a business priority. Our business will be more successful when it is profiting from the diversity that exists here, and it's building diversity in more and different ways. So when people view it as a business priority, when they get measured on it, when they get assessed as leaders on, how does your leadership team look? Why does it look like that? What are you going to do about it? Because if it's completely imbalanced, that's not appropriate. What are your next steps? And I think when people who are winners, people who want to win, if they know that that's an expectation, they will work to win against that expectation, which is why it can't be a side issue. It's got to be part of the fabric of the everyday business, in the same way that we look at financials. If you're not delivering on your financials, there's no business in the world that will question, why.
Yeah, why are you there? Then there is an issue.
There's
basically.
an issue. Fix the issue.
Yes.
So we need to do the same thing. Look at the diversity and say, where's the issue? Why is it there? And what are we going to do about it?
A lot of top leaders will say, well, it's because we can't find the women or we can't get the international talent. There'll be some excuses or reasons, fair reasons, that you don't have it. For example, in the engineering industry, we don't have as many women that choose engineering. In the finance industry, there are less women who take a business degree. What is your advice to that challenge? And now I'm also keeping in mind that you are a business executive, but you're not an engineer, and you, are not a scientist as such. You're a medical doctor, so it doesn't have to be. The journey can be sort of different depending on the person.
Absolutely. You're getting me onto a topic I'm very passionate about, which is that we've got to capture young women early. And so within schools, driving the coolness of the science, the math, those underpinnings that are going to allow young people, right? I know the US better than Denmark, but I was hearing Denmark has a similar challenge. We're not generating enough young people who are interested in STEM and particularly into computing, which is a skill for the future. So we've got to capture them early, and we've got to make the vision of what's possible and what's exciting available early on. Because if you lose particularly young women, and the US is the place I've spent most of the time thinking about this, because I've focused on areas of why do we lose young women to STEM? And they seem to drop out in that 13, 14 age group when it becomes somehow less cool to be smart. How does that happen? But we've got to fix that and bring those young women forward so that they have the skills to go into the universities and take those courses. So we fix the pipeline from that perspective. And then when we have, right now we're qualifying more women globally with PhDs, even in some of the STEM fields, helping them understand that there is a way to advance in a career and be the family person that they want to be. And that's where role modeling, career mentoring, companies understanding how to address women stepping out of the workplace as they have children, coming back in, the sharing of parental leave, evening the playing field, making sure we've got gender pay equity and ensuring women don't fall behind in the pay gap, because that also causes families to choose different paths if they've got one high earner in the family and one low earner. So we've got to make sure there's gender pay equity. There's so many avenues that we need to act on to make sure that we've got the talent. But the excuse of we can't find the women is just nonsense.
Because they're there, and you've just mentioned that they are in the PhD positions. So, but making sure we bring them into the business field. How do we do that?
Our company hires more women. We've got if we look at the whole company, we're about 52% female. Mm. So we have women within our own company, and most of the biotech and pharma industries I know about are similar. Yes. So it's really at the point of saying, how do we help these women envision the path that they can take that allows them, those that wish to, because not everybody will wish to, they can see the path forward and they can be coached and mentored.
There you're obviously a great role model. Do you have any role models yourself?
You know, all of the people who've mentored me in my career have been men, in fact, because I have lived in a generation where there were very, very few women leaders. But I do remember one when I was in Novartis in the US, when I was just coming up to a more senior leadership level and managing young children. And there was a woman who was at a more senior level, older than me, with grown children. And I just had a lunch with her one day, and I asked her, how did it work for you? Did your kids survive? How did that all work out? And she said, you know, here were the challenges, but my children are so proud of me today. And, you know, she had sons and I have sons. And so hearing that when you have your doubts and challenges earlier in your career, it's a small thing, and she may not even ever know how much that mattered, but it helped me say, okay, there are other people who have done this, and I can do it. I can make it through, because there is somebody else who's led that path, led the way. But people who've advanced my career, I've always worked for men.
So if she can do it, you can do it, is how you felt?
Yes.
So role models are so important, and that's obviously also our pursuit with this particular campaign. We would like more role models for Anna Sophia, because right now when she's reading the papers in the morning together with me, she doesn't see anyone that she could be. And maybe when she's at school, she'll see a lot of teachers that she could be, and it basically limits the playing field.
Yes, it starts to push direction very early on.
Do you have any last piece of advice for any other companies who want to drive diversity internally?
Make it a business objective. If your people are the lifeblood of your business, the finances enable people to make the business happen. So making sure you have the best ability to draw all that your people have to give is a business imperative. And diversity and inclusion is a key enabler and unlocking of that human potential. So it's imperative for the business. So talk about it, prioritize it, measure it, and be relentless about consistently doing that, and things will move. And then don't make excuses that there are no women. If you have leaders under you who tell you that, well, we couldn't find any qualified women, then send them away until they do when they're interviewing for an important role, because it simply means they haven't looked far enough. They haven't been creative enough.
Really great piece of advice to finish on today. Thank you so much, Deborah Dunsire. You are the CEO of Lundbeck. And thank you so much to you for joining us today. There will be many more interviews during the next few weeks. So do find us on your social media platforms or visit our website, which is rollemodellerforalle.dk. Thank you.
I har lyttet til et interview i serien, hvor vi sætter fokus på diversitet, rollemodeller og kvinder i ledelse. Serien er en del af kampagnen Rollemodeller for alle, der er lavet i samarbejde mellem Female Leadership Academy og Kvindekompagniet og produceret af Inspire Film. Du kan se mere på hjemmesiden Rollemodeller for alle, hvor du også finder andre interviews. Du kan også deltage i debat på Facebook, Instagram og LinkedIn.